Hi, this is Mike from BandLab. With BandLab's included instruments and effects, you can make any kind of music you like. In this video, we'll show you how to make a hardcore techno beat with stomping drums, twisted synths, and heavy bass. You can open this project yourself with the link in the video description. And if you find this guide useful, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be the first to know when new videos drop. I start by setting the project tempo to 132 beats per minute and the project key to F minor. The most important element of a hardcore techno track is the kick drum. There are many sampled kick loops suitable for hard techno styles and BandLab's sounds, so I open it up and search for techno. I open the Warehouse Techno Drums and Bass pack and drag WT128 Drums 2-bar single kick into the project. I loop the clip out for 4 bars in length using the loop handle. I set this track to -3 dB to give us more headroom to add other elements to the mix. Next, I drag WT128 Drums 2-bar reed hats into the project, again looping it out for 4 bars. Again, I set the track to -3 dB. Now I want to program some percussion sounds to complement these drum loops. I create a new virtual instrument track and set it to drum pads 909. I set this track to -6 dB. I add claps on the second and fourth beat of the first 2 bars. I then add extra claps on the final 16th note of the first bar and on the 16th after the fourth beat of the second bar. I then add open hats between each beat. I want these to be a little louder, so I set the velocity level to 119. Finally, I add rides on each beat. I'd like these to be a touch quieter, so I turn their velocity down to 60. I duplicate the 2 bars out for the rest of the clip. To duplicate notes or clips in BandLab, hold Option on Mac or Alt on Windows and drag them over. I'd also like to add some 909 snares, but I'd like to put some effects on these that I don't want to add to the other 909 sounds. So I simply create another 909 track. I set this track to -11 dB. I sequence a rhythmic snare pattern that plays on the 3rd, 7th, 8th, 11th, 14th, 15th, and 16th notes. I duplicate this pattern out for the rest of the 4-bar clip. In the effects panel, I add a distortion BL driver effect, turning the tone all the way up and setting the drive to 2.5. I then add a reverb, studio reverb, setting the mix to 35% and the size to 19%. Next, I want to add some musical elements, starting with the bass line. I create a new instrument track and set it to Synth Basses, Future Redux Bass. I set this track to -4 dB. I compose a simple bass line that plays F between each beat. I'd like to have a Rave stab in this track, so in BandLab's sounds, I return to the main page, and this time search for Rave. I open the 90s Rave pack and set the instrument filter to Synth. I like the sound of 9R142 A minor stab evil 4-bar, so I create a new sampler track and drag it onto the first sample pad. I drag the sample end marker to the left so that this pad plays just the first note of the sample. I set the pitch to -1 so the stab fits musically with the bass line. I set the track to -5.5 dB to balance it with the other elements. I sequence a simple stab line that plays the sample between each beat. I add a studio reverb effect to the track so that it sounds more atmospheric. Now I want to add a sinister Reese-style synth. I create an instrument track and set it to synth basses, Porto Reese. I set this track to -9.6 dB. I sequence a part that moves between F on 3 octaves. These notes sometimes overlap, which causes the instrument to glide between notes. There are also some notes that play on adjacent semitones, giving the part a sinister, funky feel. In the effects panel, I add a distortion buzz face effect, setting the fuzz to 10. I then add a tone multi-filter effect, setting the resonance to 7.6 and turning the frequency all the way up. This doesn't have much of an effect at the moment, but I'm going to automate this later. I then add a tone graphic EQ. I set the 100 Hz band to -8.6 dB, the 800 Hz band to -4.1 dB, and the 1.6 kHz band to +4.3 dB. I then add a modulation, phase 72, turning the speed down to its minimum. Finally, I add a studio reverb, setting the mix to 35% and the size to 9. Now I'm going to add some sound effects that will help me create a heavy drop. In BandLab's Sounds, I select the One Shots tab and enter Impact into the text search field. I drag Impact 1E into the project. I set this track to -9.7 dB. I feel like the sample would be better at a lower pitch, so I double-click it to bring up the editor panel and set its pitch to 0. Next, I search for sweep. I drag sweep up 1F into the project, positioning it at the start of the second bar. This means it crescendos just before the end of the 8-bar sequence if I duplicate everything out. I set this track to -10.5 dB. I also set the pitch of this sample to 0. I then search for crash. I drag crash based into the project. I set this track to -18 dB. For the arrangement, I start out with just the kick drum. The tops loop is added on bar 5. On bar 9, the 909 percussion sounds come in. On bar 13, the snare comes in. On bar 17, the bass drops. On bar 21, the stab joins the mix. On bar 25, the tops, 909, and snare drop out. The snares then come in for 4 bars before the breakdown. On bar 33, we have the breakdown. Here I automate the re-synth in using the low-pass filter. At the end of the breakdown, a snare roll builds up to the drop. Eight bars after the drop, the snare returns. On bar 57, the stab drops out. On bar 65, the snare drops out. On bar 73, the reese drops out and we have an 8-bar drums and bass outro. Remember, you can fork this project and make your own version of it using the link in the video description. Have fun!